begin with a very simple question first, which all of us here at the Department of French Studies are very curious to ask you. Susie, you were born in USA and you moved to France only after your marriage, and that's when you are introduced to the French language, correct?
Yes. I knew 3 words.
Yeah. So yeah, we are very curious to find out those 3 words as well, the ones which you knew when you moved to France. But before that, the natural question which all of us here from the French department would like to ask you is your choice to write in French language, which doesn't happen to be your native tongue.
Okay.
Why French?
It's very mysterious. I don't have an answer to the question. I just sat down one day, and when I finished my thesis, I had enough university, enough criticism of books. I didn't want to criticize books, I wanted to write books. And I sat down, maybe the day after I got my thesis, and I said, I'm going to write a novel. And of course I thought I would write in English. And I wrote, and I wrote, and wrote. And when I got up after the day's work, I saw that I had written it in French. So it's very mysterious, but I was living in France, in Nice. My children were speaking French among themselves. They spoke English to me because if they spoke to me in French, I played deaf. And I was writing about French schools and French things. If I came to India, maybe I would write in Hindi. I was very sorry that I hadn't married an Italian. It just came, it had to be French, and I had a very limited vocabulary. I have never studied French. I still do not know how to conjugate verbs. I don't know the difference between the imparfait, the passé composé, the passé imparfait. Don't even speak about the subjonctif. And I have written a whole book putting all the verbs in the infinitive because I didn't know how to conjugate them. And even now, today, my husband corrected my manuscripts. He didn't like to do that. I would even have to promise to sew a button on his shirt against corrections. It was, and he would write, when there were more than 3 mistakes in a sentence, he wrote in the margin, merde. That's a very vulgar word. And there were manuscripts where it was written 25 times on each page. This was quite humiliating, but I didn't care. Now my daughter, who's a linguist in the university, a linguistic professor, she corrects my texts. She corrects everything. I don't even write a letter without my daughter correcting it. And she doesn't write a vulgar word. She just says, Mama. She says, I told you 1,000 times. And she said, I suspect that you just do accepter les changements, accept all changes, and you don't even read the corrections. But I do read the corrections, but it doesn't go into the head. No. So it's a very strange phenomenon. I think I'm probably the only American writing in French. There's Nancy Houston, but she grew up in France. I can't think of anybody else who writes, an American who writes in French. And it's great because when I write in English, I see how stupid I am. But when I write in French, I think I'm great. I'm not conscious. It's a fool's paradise to write in a language that isn't your native language.
Well, thank you so much for that answer. You have no idea how inspiring it is for all of us here who are learning the French language. Your life story and choice of writing in French. And thank you especially for highlighting the grammar part of French. I'm sure that made all our students from the French department very happy. So you have given them excuses to continue making more mistakes. Since if a writer can, why can't they? That would be the thing they'll be saying now.
But unfortunately, I do not learn from my mistakes. I just keep making the same mistakes over and over again.
Thank you so much for that lovely answer. Moving on to the second question, which is related with the genre of children's literature. Now, most of us have this a bit of vague idea in our mind as to how the children's literature is to be. But when one reads your work, and I would like to quote your work, La Petite Dernière, which is loosely based on you and your family story, I was surprised to discover that the work maintains the light and innocent tone, which is the essence of children's literature, but at the same time the work had subtle undertones of not so childlike themes such as the Second World War, racism, homosexuality, Anne Frank, and the Jewish exodus after the Second World War. Hence the question which raises itself is how important it is, do you think, for such themes to be presented in children's literature, and how to strike a balance between these diverse themes. Thank you.
Wow! Wow!
I did my homework, so.
Yes, and I'm so surprised to see that you wrote everything by hand. How important to present different things? It's just according to who you are. You write with what you are. It's not because it's important that I write about these things. It's because this is who I am. Hello, hello. It's really, we don't decide that we're going to write a book about World War II, or we're going to write about a handicapped child. It's just that you get an idea about a handicapped child. I wrote a book with my daughter, who is an endocrinologist who treats diabetes, and she wanted a book about a diabetic girl. And we wrote that book, and it's very satisfying when a child in a class that I visit says, "Thank you for the book, because it's the first book in which I saw my own problem." But that was sort of that was sort of dictated by her wish to write a book about a diabetic child. There are not a lot of books about handicapped children. There are not a lot of books about sports. I would love to write a book about a girl who plays football, but I don't know enough about football, so it can't be me. There are themes I'd like to treat, but I think it's not for me. So the Jewish history is very much part of my life. My grandparents left Ukraine because of the pogroms and the persecution, and they went to America. And my biggest regret is that I didn't ask my grandmother questions. My grandmother came to America when she was 14 years old on one of those cattle boats. And at 14, she went to America all alone. She worked in a sweatshop, the shops to make clothes. And I know nothing about her life. My own children couldn't cross the street when they were 14. But my grandmother crossed the ocean when she was 14. And I ask no questions. And that's why in my books, I always tell children to ask questions. Ask your parents questions. Ask your grandparents questions. It's too late for me to ask my grandmother questions. And I would love to write a book about a girl who comes to America and works in a sweatshop and a life. I could do research, but I could have asked my grandmother. You know? And so this is very much a part of who I am. I write a lot about love, a lot of love stories. I read a lot of love stories. I dream of love. I love love. So my books are, many of my books are about love, like Lettres d'amour de 0 à 10, which was translated in English as secret letters, not love letters, but secret letters from 0 to 10, because the publisher was afraid that boys wouldn't read a book that was about love letters. But in France, the boys read it as much as the girls. So it's these things. I just wrote a book about homosexuality because it's not yet accepted. I don't know if it will be accepted, because this is how an idea comes. A friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, said that her daughter just told her she was in love with a girl, and she was feeling very queasy. How do you say queasy in French? I say like nausea or queasy. She wasn't very comfortable. She wasn't very comfortable with it, and she was angry at herself that she wasn't comfortable. And with that, I wrote a book about a girl who tells her mother, "I'm in love." And the mother is so happy that her daughter's in love. And she says, "With who, with who?" "Oh, I'm not going to tell you yet." And the mother imagines all the candidates. It will be a doctor, a brilliant doctor. He will be a brilliant lawyer. He will be a student in ENA, that's the École Nationale d'Administration. He will be this, he will be that. And then she reproaches herself and she says, "Oh, I am such a bourgeoise." Maybe he could be a street musician, or maybe he could be a plumber, or maybe he could be... So the whole book is about the mother's fantasizing about the candidate of the daughter. And we know what the end is going to be. So this is how ideas come. This book, for example, is about vegetables, les potins de potager. And I told Lorenzo and Vincent that I had never eaten a fresh vegetable in my life before going to France. And my husband forced me to eat a tomato. He opened my mouth, and I didn't even know the word in English for any of them, for poireau, for artichoke. I had never seen an artichoke. Do you have artichoke? Leeks, poireau, and the only thing I knew was a potato. And I became fascinated with vegetables. So I decided to write this book of poems, a poem about each vegetable. And I would go to the market and I'd choose a leek. You know, like you were buying a wedding dress. I would pick the most beautiful leek in the market. And then the merchant would take the leek and break it in half. I said, "No!" And I would have to go through the process again. I took the leek home And I would sit with it and feel it and smell it, and then I would write my poem. I lived with my vegetables. Perhaps I'll read you the potato. This is a bilingual book. It's written in English and French. I'll read you the French version. Pomme de terre, ma douce amie, tu es sans aucun doute ma grosse chérie. Si stable, si fiable, si solide, si ronde, somnolente, enterrée dans le sol du monde. Toi qui ne déçois jamais, tu viens vite me consoler. Quel trésor, purée divine! Au gratin, en omelette, chasse la famine. Au beurre, à la crème, épluché, habillé. Patate, ma patate, je veux t'épouser. And the translation is not really a translation. Potato, potato, my comfy old friend, you are what we can call a real godsend. So stable, so steadfast, so oval, so round, buried there in the soul of the ground. We dig you up like earth's hidden gold. Then you sleep in the cellar to warm when it's cold. You never, ever disappoint me. You're always around to give me a spree. Some mashed potatoes, oh, what a treasure. French fried or baked, a heavenly pleasure. Buttery, creamy, plain, peeled or dressed. I love you, potato, you're the best. You see, I have fun in life. I have fun in life. The writing life is a happy life. Yeah. So about the themes, did I answer?
Yeah. Wonderful. I think representation matters, and that's what you are trying to capture when you're talking about these diverse themes in your work, be it homosexuality, diabetes, handicapped children, or the Jewish exodus after the Second World War. So thank you so much for bringing those themes in your work, and through that you give it a platform so that these micro minorities can also be represented in some way or the other. So thank you so much. Moving on to the next question, it is related to a quote of yours. I'll say it in French first. Écrire, c'est aussi un moyen de parler quand on ne peut pas, which translates roughly into English as, writing is another way of speaking when we cannot speak. Can you elaborate a bit on this for our young students here today, this art of speaking through writing? Thank you.
Yes, I wrote a book with my teenage daughter when she was a teenager. There was a conflict, a mother-daughter conflict. I would ask her when she came home from school a terribly indiscreet question. How was your day? And she would answer, it's none of your business. And I said, if you are not my business, I'm out of business. I'm bankrupt. You are my main business. And I decided to write to her. I wrote the first chapter. The book is called Terminal Tout le monde descend, and we won the big prize from the ministry, the ex-ministry of the ex-rights of women. It was Edith Rudy. So I wrote the first chapter, and the first chapter was getting up in the morning, and how she would slam doors and change clothes and brush her hair, and there'd be a lot of noise and a lot of nerves, and every day she would be dressed exactly the same, not like you, in jeans and a t-shirt, and all that drama for the same jeans and the t-shirt. And then I gave her that chapter, and she answered me. And it was bloody. It was brutal. It was the most brutal, bloody book I have written. She told me everything that she thought of me. She still tells me everything she thinks of me. She wrote, Ma mère est hypocrite, menteuse et radine. My mother is a hypocrite, a liar, and radine, selfish,
Egoist.
yeah, it's somebody who won't spend money.
Oh, miser.
A miser, right, a miser. We took that out of the book. We censored it. It was such, it is to this day, I don't think you could find a more brutal, cruel picture of a mother than the mother I was, according to my daughter. And when I read it today, it really hurts. But we talk to each other. Things that we couldn't say face to face, we wrote. There are 10 chapters, mine and hers, so 20 chapters. Her version, my version. And it was quite successful. But what was successful was that it was a great therapy. Because things you can't say face to face, you can write. I suggest this to teachers and students, husbands and wives. It's really a good way of talking. I started writing, of course, because I lived in a very, very noisy, animated family where I couldn't place a word. The only way I could talk was to write. And that was how I really started to write. Writing is a calm way of expressing turmoil. Yeah. You can write calmly in your corner, and you can think, and it's slow, and it's not angry. You know, you can do. Writing is really a very good therapy. I think everybody should write. I animate a lot of writers' workshops in France and in the world, and it's my favorite thing. You know, we sit around a table, you don't know anybody, and at the end of the day, we know everything about everybody, because writing is so much deeper than just talking. We really get to. I have animated workshops in Nanterre, with almost illiterate women, and all we did was cry. They had so many things to say, and they wrote it, and we read it, and we just cried all day long. Writing is, well, I wrote, this is one of my last books. It's called Writing is Breathing. I love to say yes in Hindu. Hello? Yeah, so this book is called Writing is Breathing, and I really think it is. You know, there's a lot of strikes in France about retirement right now. And children always ask me, when are you going to retire? And I say, there is no retirement for a writer. If I don't write, I don't eat. If I don't write, I don't breathe. Writing is breathing. There's no retirement, there's no statute of a writer, there's no social statute of a writer.
Thank you so much for that answer. Before we move on to the next question, actually our florist this morning, he ran away with Lorenzo's bouquet, which is finally here. So I would ask two of his most sincere students from the new batch, Rohan and Piyush, to present him with the bouquet. And then we move on with the conversation.